We've been in this series called Walking Each Other Home, and today we're going to be closing out that series. And I've really enjoyed being on this journey with you all. You know, we do these series where we kind of focus on a certain theme over a certain period of time, and it's really nice for all of us to kind of be swimming in those same waters and sitting in the same topics together, because I find that it flavors our conversations, and so I appreciate all of you being willing to, you know, both metaphorically and quite literally walk with each other during this process, and it's been a great way for us to start 2026. And so I thought, as we close out this series, the best way for me that I know how to kind of wrap up a series is to throw a wrench in everything that we've talked about so far, which is to say that there will be some paradoxes that we talk about today. And paradox is interesting because when we think about paradox, it shows up initially as a contradiction. And so it's possible that some of the things that we talk about today might feel like, I don't know how that sits with what we've already talked about. Some ideas that are paradoxical that may even seem contradictory. But what I love about paradox is that if we can sit with paradox, that often it opens us up to a higher perspective in which two seemingly conflicting things can be true at the same time. And this video that just played, this excerpt from the poet David Whyte, he covers this, and he begins to explore some paradoxes. You know, one that I love is he says, how do you know you're on the path? Because it disappears. And I don't know if you found this to be true, but I know for me, there have been moments in my life where I've found that maybe there's something about being on the path that actually invites us to let go of the idea that there is a perfect path, right? Or to let go of the idea that we're going to always know where we're going. How many of us have found that life is not so straightforward and not as linear as we thought it was going to be? Certainly, when we start out, you know, when we're young, we might think life is going to be a straight line, right? Point A to point B, you have your goals, and, you know, as long as you go for them, they're going to be easy to achieve. And then over time, you know, life starts to reveal itself to be a little bit more windy and bendy than you had initially thought. And at a certain point, you might resign yourself to the fact that life ends up being just, someone said, there it is, there's life, yeah. This looks a lot like my signature, by the way, which is a good reminder for me. Every time I sign something, I should be like, life is about as crazy as my signature. But, you know, last week we talked about this idea of the sprint and the marathon. You know, this top part looks a lot more like a sprint. You know, just go from point A to point B as quickly as possible. And as we go to the bottom, and this a lot more, these squiggly lines here at the bottom, that reminds me of what we were talking about last week with the marathon, this idea that, you know, it's going to be a long process, and can we enjoy and find ourselves inhabiting each moment instead of trying to get to our destination as quickly as possible. And so I kind of want to go deeper into that idea today of giving up the destination and the freedom that will find us along the way. And so the title for today's message is The Pathless Path. Bit of a paradox here, the pathless path. And basically, spoiler alert, but it's 20 minutes of me in more or less complicated language, just basically saying, let's go with the flow, right? So if that's all you needed to hear today, if all you needed to hear today was go with the flow, and that's, and you feel satisfied, then thank you for joining us, and, have a great Sunday. If you do want to stick around, happy to have you stick around for the rest of it. But I want to start today with a quote from an Indian sage named Nisargadatta Maharaj, this quote, I think, captures some of the paradox that we're going to be swimming in today. So just see how this lands on you. You are searching for what you already have. When you give up all searching, you find it. I don't know about you, but I've found that spirituality tends to be full of all of these kinds of reversals and these riddle-like statements that seem to almost have this backwards effect, right? Like Jesus said, lose your life in order to find it. Or in the Tao, there is this concept called Wu Wei, which essentially means effortless effort, or the act of doing non-doing, the way of no way, the path of no path. We talk about things like this all the time, like let go in order to realize you have it all, or our softness is our strength. Things that seem to operate in a reverse format. And so I want to just start today with just a couple of statements that invite us into this level of paradox, that invite us to just shift our thinking, open our perspective. And I just want to see how maybe these statements land on you. Particularly, we all come from a culture that tells us that we need to figure it out, that we need to be fixed, that we need to be healed. And so I'm curious how it might be if we put that aside, even just these next 20 minutes, and see how it felt to try on a different mode of thinking. And so I'm going to say these statements, and I encourage you to let these land on you for a second. Here's the first one. What if the only healing that you and I actually need is the realization that we are already whole and we are already perfect? Like, what if the only healing that we really need is healing from the belief that we needed to be fixed, right? Or we needed to be healed. Maybe for those of us who come from a certain religious background where the term salvation is thrown around a lot, I'll say this one. What if the only salvation we need is the freedom from this idea that we need to be saved? And really, as we talk about this idea of the journey and the path, and as we close this series, what if the point of the journey was to realize that it was all right here the whole time? What if we go on this whole path and we go on this whole journey only to realize that we already had everything we needed? Because I don't know if you felt this way, but I know for me, I felt that the further we go down the path of life, the more we do, the more we realize that it was already with us the whole time. It was already there. I have a friend who, he says it's like doing the steps of spirituality, thinking that, it's important that I do step 1 and step 2 and step 3, step 4, step 5, step 6, step 7, and then you get to step 8, and step 8 of spirituality is basically forget steps 1 through 7, right? And I don't know if you found this to be true, but it's almost as though as we go down the path of life, the wiser we get, the less we know. I know for me, I think about my path and realizing that as I've journeyed through life, it was about trying to figure it out, trying to discern if I'm on the right path. So I grew up in a Christian environment, grew up going to church, and eventually I started working at that church. So I went from being an amateur Christian to a professional Christian, which meant I could no longer compete in the Christian Olympics. But, it was a good choice for me at the time. And I don't want to brag. But I don't want to brag, but I was a pretty good Christian. I knew my Bible really well, and I went to church all the time. And so there was a point where I was like, this is the path. This is what I need to do. Then I got to a point later in life where I began to question some of those beliefs. I began to challenge some of those things that I had been taught and look at certain things with not only a more critical lens, but also ask myself what truly resonated with me. And this is a process that some of us have called deconstruction and can be a very important part of the spiritual journey. And yet there was a point where I thought, okay, this is the path. This is what I need to do in order to be whole and complete. So I went all into that, and I read all the books and listened to all the podcasts. And wherever I've gone, whatever I've done, I noticed that there has been this tendency and really this question that I've been asking, am I enough? Right? Like, can I figure it all out? Am I on the right path? I don't know if you've ever had this question in your heart. For me, I feel like I've looked back on my life and I feel like I'm always asking this question until all these roads, as valuable and as beautiful as they can be, they also ultimately will not satisfy that question. Because this is the paradox of it, if you find yourself at the mystical heart of any religious tradition or spiritual tradition, often what's being said is actually to let go of the searching, right? To let go of the idea that you will arrive, that you will figure it out. And there's a freedom there, right? But you need to exhaust all your means in order to get there. There's a teacher named Krishnamurti who said, truth is a pathless land. And I know, again, it's a bit of a paradox to think about pathlessness, right? We've been talking this whole series about what has your path of life been like? And now we're saying, what if we asked ourselves what it would look like to engage with the idea of pathlessness? Because our minds sometimes interpret pathlessness as being lost or being aimless or confused. And that can sometimes be what it looks like. There's a pathlessness in which we don't know what we're supposed to do. And then sometimes we find a path, and that can be really valuable and rewarding. But if we keep going, it's almost as though there is this realization that we can return to pathlessness in a sense that is freeing ourselves from the idea that we need to be on the exact right path. I'll give you an example. There is a difference between not knowing where to go and knowing that there is nowhere you need to go. Do we understand this difference, right? There is a difference between not knowing what you're supposed to do and knowing that there's nothing you need to do. And yet what's interesting is that it takes us going through the path of life in order to get to a place where we can hold it all a little more loosely. Now, again, I know this is very paradoxical, so I thought in order to communicate this idea a little more concretely, I'll bring something very everyday and normal into the picture. And so I thought I need to end this series with a truly spectacular prop because I began this series with a spectacular prop. If you were not here, I began this series with a treadmill, and though, I think the highest level of any prop is a motorized prop, but I think this will have to do. I know it's not quite at the level of the treadmill, but I think it's a close second. And actually, it's a little more dangerous, I feel, than the treadmill. So, But the reason I bring this is because sometimes the path of life, right, going down our journeys, sometimes it's like a climb, right? It's like climbing this ladder of life. Sometimes it's climbing the ladder of success, right? Like what do I need to achieve in order to be of worth and of value, to be loved, to be enough? Maybe we climb the ladder of fulfilling other people's expectations of us. Maybe we climb the ladder of spirituality, thinking that if we climb enough, that we're going to figure it all out. Carl Jung spoke about this in terms of the first half and the second half of life. Richard Rohr is another who talks about this very same concept. And he says this climb is what we would call the first half of life. This is not based on age. It's not based on time. It's an awareness shift, right? So it's not like you just naturally going from one half to the other. It's more about a shift in perspective. So there are people who maybe spend their whole life in first half consciousness. But the first half is basically this. It's when we're answering the questions, who am I, right? Like, what am I supposed to be doing here? Where am I supposed to go? It's figuring out the who, what, and where of life. How many of us can recognize that we've all done this. We've spent a good chunk of our life trying to answer those questions, trying to figure out who we're supposed to be in this world. Maybe some of us even climb this ladder, and again, whether you call it God or the universe or ultimate reality, some of us have climbed this ladder trying to figure out what this all is about, right? Trying to figure out the answers. And I don't know about you, but my experience has been this. It's like you get up here and you're like, God, I'm here. I'm at the top of the ladder. Where are you? And God's like, oh, hey, what are you doing? What you doing down there? And you're like, well, I thought if I climbed up this ladder that, it would all make sense. And God's like, that's cute, I guess, And you're like, well, no, but I did all this stuff. I climbed, right? Does that mean that I'm on the right path? And it's almost as if God or ultimate reality is looking at us going, there's nothing you could have done to ever stray from your path. You've always been on the path, right? You've always been loved. You've always had it all. You've always been enough, right? It's not up here. It's everywhere. It's always been with you. And hey, good on you. It took you coming all the way up to the top of the ladder to realize that, sure. But it's actually everywhere. Maybe it wasn't that exact thing for you. Maybe for you it was career. You took career about as far as you could take it. And you got up to the top of the ladder and you're like, well, I don't really feel any different. It doesn't seem like this is what's going to fulfill me. Maybe in life you went all the places you thought you needed to go. You did all the stuff you thought you were supposed to do. And yet through it all, something felt like it was missing. That missing piece that we thought we needed to find never showed up, right? That thing that would seem to validate, well, I guess I must have been on the right path. And so what I'm wondering today, what I think the invitation is to let go of the idea that there was something missing, to let go of the idea that you and I are incomplete, to let go of the idea that if we just do enough, if we go on the right path, then we will be loved. See, we're looking outside of ourselves to fill what feels like a lack. But what if we could let go of the idea that we're lacking? And that could be the freedom. Adyashanti, a teacher, says, enlightenment is the end of the search. Now, what's interesting about this is it's not the finish line. Enlightenment is not the place where the search ends. It's more like the moment where we let go of the idea that we need to keep searching, that we free ourselves from always constantly striving to figure out what we need to figure out, to do what we need to do, to become what we need to become, and find the freedom that comes with letting that go. And to start to come down from the ladder. And this is what Jung or Richard Rohr would call the second half of life, right? Where we begin to trade all that knowledge that we've accumulated for wisdom, right? Or we trade our achievements for a sense of contentment, right? Or we let go of status and the importance that we place on that to experience a way of being in which we don't need any of that. Now, the paradox of it all is that in many ways it took us going through the first half of life in order to get to the second half of life. It took us climbing up the ladder, realizing that there was nothing actually up here, in order to come back down. We need to go on the path in order to find the freedom that comes with letting go of our attachment to the path. We need to become somebody to let go of that identity. You might be out there and you might be saying, well, I get what you're saying. I get, that it's not all about achievements. It's not all about just trying to become somebody. But to be honest, you might be thinking, it's a bit of a gamble. I've spent so much of my life trying to figure out who I am. It's a bit of a gamble to just let all that go all of a sudden. And so to that, I would just say, I think what we need is the F word. Faith. We need a little faith. Because I think what we're talking about really is a matter of trust and of love. Call it what you want, right? Whether you call it God or the universe. But I think we've all had this sense that we are part of something much greater than ourselves. You look at this planet, and this beautiful earth is a reminder that we are part of something so much bigger that seems to provide for us, seems to hold space for us to be exactly what we are. So we have this sense, right, however you choose to name it or visualize it, that we are part of something so much greater than ourselves. And it seems as though this thing does not have the human judgments that we have. It does not seem to be judging us like we judge each other. It seems to have only love and acceptance for us. There is a wholeness present there. And so the faith aspect, the trust aspect is this, right? If we have faith that on some level that is true, right? If we can trust in that we are part of something much greater and that it has taken care of things, right? It is complete. It is whole. Then the idea that you and I could figure it out by being on the exact right path, the idea that you and I getting it right is essential to the whole equation, it starts to become a little funny. It starts to become a relief when we realize, wow, look at me in all my self-importance thinking that I needed to figure it out to make the universe work. Because I think when we look at some of those great spiritual teachers whose words have lasted for thousands and thousands of years, who we're still following in the traditions of, they all seem to have a bit of a twinkle in their eye. They all seem to be in on the joke, so to speak, because so much of what they were saying had to do with us not taking ourselves too seriously, with us releasing the idea that we needed to hold the weight of the world on our shoulders. Releasing the idea that it was about figuring it all out, understanding it all. There's a meme that I love. It's 2026, so your sermons have memes now. But there's this meme that I love that captures this idea that we can see this letting go of control as a terrifying thing, right? Like, I'm not in control of the universe, to what a relief I'm not in control of the universe. You have two people on the same bus, and one's thinking, it's out of my control, and the other's thinking, it's out of my control, woohoo, you know? The same reality, the same idea can be terrifying or relief, depending on the perspective. And so maybe it takes us going through the path and releasing our attachment to it to get to that other side. Alan Watts said, this is the real secret of life, to be completely engaged with what you are doing in the here and now, and instead of calling it work, realize it is play. This doesn't mean that we do nothing. I think it means the opposite. To be completely engaged in what we're doing, but maybe just invite an ease and a lightness to it, right? Like, there's nothing wrong with the ladders. We all have had our own version of the ladder. There's nothing wrong with it. But when we realize that the fulfillment doesn't lie outside of us, right? When we realize that we were never lacking, then we can climb whatever ladders we want to climb for the fun of it, without feeling like the fate of the world rests upon our shoulders. See, whether it's a ladder or whether it's a path, I think the realization here is that everything, right, every path that we take, it's just a vehicle for us to experience that deeper sense of love, of wholeness, right? So don't get caught up in how you got there. Don't get caught up in the path itself, right? Remember that it's where it leads that is what's most important. I think of this like a rocket ship, okay? Stay with me. Think about a rocket ship, right? Like, it takes all these rockets to get the space shuttle to escape the atmosphere. But then when it's time, when the space shuttle reaches the edge of the atmosphere, the rockets themselves must drop off, right, and fall into the ocean. Because once the rockets are done doing their job, they actually would carry way too much weight to allow the craft to enter into outer space. So they go from being essential to helping this thing get from point A to point B to all of a sudden then being willing to let those rockets go. And the idea here is that our paths, our traditions, our spiritual practices, the teachings that we follow, they are all wonderful. They are all amazing, but they are also vehicles that allow us to experience a deeper truth that is beyond words. And so can we release our attachment to them and realize that, hey, however we got here, that's great, but we're here now. Religion's a great example of this because I think at its best, religion is about trying to get us into an experience of being. But so often we value the teachings and the tradition higher than what they're pointing us towards. As Buddha said, the finger pointing at the moon is not the moon, right? So is the goal of a religion to be the best person at that religion, to be the best Christian or the best Buddhist, or is the goal the experience of union with the divine, right? Like, is the goal of philosophy to memorize all the best philosophical quotes, or is it to experience a freedom that comes along with internalizing those truths? The paths are great, but it's where they lead that truly matters. It's where they lead that truly matters. And I think where they're leading us is love, right? I mean, I know that we just celebrated Valentine's Day, and that's a celebration of romantic love, sure. But there's also the love period kind of love. A love that transcends and includes that type of love. A love that is without judgment. A love that is pure acceptance. And I know that sometimes we wish that romantic love could operate at that level, could be wholly without judgment and of pure acceptance, but it doesn't always do that, right? It's not always that we're not always able to achieve that. But there is a love that does operate at that level. And I think that what that love is inviting us to is this awareness that we can look at our whole lives and have gratitude for all of it, to see how it all belongs, right? That all of the windy roads, all of the twists and turns, even the hardest moments of our lives, they all belong. We don't need to sit here and judge how things should have been, right? How our past should have looked, or to get caught up in how we were wronged. Or it's almost like that awareness that comes at the very end of life, where if you're able to truly let go of all the resentments and all the burdens, you can just simply dissolve into gratitude and love. You could say, this path that I took in life, that was my path. And I just can appreciate it for what it is. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to close with a song, and we're going to close with candle lighting. And what I want to do is to invite you to take these next couple of minutes and just to reflect on your journey as we close this series. Reflect on what it means to walk each other home. And as you think about your journey of life, maybe you just think about what you're grateful for. You know, this song that Bill's going to sing, in many ways is saying, you know, where the paths lead us, what the real secret of life is just to enjoy the process of it. Not to get caught up in the destination, where it's all going, but to realize that walking each other home, that's the joy of it right there, in the walking. And so when we release this need to be perfect, to have it all figured out, we're freed to enjoy the moment and to be in the moment. And so if you choose to light a candle, you can do that by coming up the center aisle, exiting the sides. There's also a candle station in the back of the room. I just invite you to take a moment and see what comes to mind for you as you think about appreciation and gratitude for your path, releasing attachment to how things should have been and should have gone and should be. And just accepting yourself in this moment. Even if you see yourself as less than whole, less than perfect, right? Warts and all, can you accept and love yourself in this moment exactly as you're showing up? And so, for these next few minutes, I invite you, if you would like, you can let a candle be your representation of that gratitude, that love. I know there's so much that we hold, so much when it comes to our world, and I know that we're carrying a lot of that in our bodies. And it's because we care, because we have so much love and so much care. But there's a beauty that comes when we can just bring a sense of lightness into the equation, to remember that we don't have to figure it all out, that we have each other. That's the beauty of walking each other home. And when you don't have to figure it all out, when you don't have to be perfect, right? When you don't have to be everything for everyone, then it eases your burdens in such a way that maybe you can inhabit this life with just an ounce more freedom, a little bit more gratitude, right? That when we engage in our world, when we encounter people in our daily lives, just a little more patience, a little more love, a little more kindness. And so as we not only close this message, but this series, I just want to invite you, if you feel so comfortable, then to close your eyes and just allow that image, that feeling that came to you when you were lighting your candle, allow that to come back up one more time. Maybe that image encapsulates so much for you. What this life has meant. The gratitude for the people that have been there for you. For the ways that you've shown up for yourself. And I just invite you to hold on to that for a second here now. And to see it clearly and to allow it to really sink into your heart in such a way that as we move forward in our lives, as we move forward in time, that we can still return to this awareness, to this gratitude, to this sense of acceptance and love. To remember that it's always with us, that there's nothing we need to do to earn it or achieve it. And just holding it in such a way that when life challenges us, that we can draw upon this. So we have gratitude for each other, those who spent this last hour with us. Grateful that this moment is unique in the history of the universe. There's never going to be one quite like it. And so in the preciousness of it all and the beauty of it all, we open our eyes whenever we feel comfortable.